A wealthy investor named Daniel Hart thought he understood loyalty until he watched his longtime CEO calmly sign away the futures of dozens of workers he had once promised to protect. Now, with the ink on the layoff plan still drying and a factory floor full of frightened families below them, Daniel faced a choice his money could not make for him. Was he going to quietly protect his own fortune, or burn his standing to the ground to save people who would never sit in his penthouse office? On a gray Tuesday that smelled like burned coffee and cold rain, the millionaire turned against his own CEO, and nothing in the town of Maplebridge would ever be the same.
The storm rolled in just after lunch, dragging a curtain of rain over the wide glass windows of Hartwell Manufacturing's headquarters. From his corner office on the 14th floor, Daniel Hart watched water race in thin streams down the pane, tracing erratic paths like the financial graphs that had started dipping faster than anyone wanted to admit. Below, the factory complex stretched like a steel-gray maze. Production lines, the logistics wing, the old brick building that used to be a textile mill, long before his grandfather bought it. Between the buildings, bright dots of umbrellas bobbed along the footpath, a slow parade of workers heading back from the cafeteria with their lunches in hand. Daniel's office was clean, almost surgically so. White walls, a single-framed photo of his grandparents standing in front of the first Hartwell machine press, a live ficus tree in the corner, and a sleek glass desk that reflected the pale light like an icy pond. On the wall calendar behind his chair, red circles marked 3 dates: quarterly board meeting, union contract renewal, and Dad's Pancakes, Sunday. The last one made him smile faintly. His father still made pancakes every other Sunday in the old house across town, insisting that no matter how rich they got, a good life still started with flour, eggs, and a hot pan. "Mr. Hart?" His assistant Mia stood in the doorway, a folder pressed tight against her chest. She was in her early 30s, sharp-eyed with a knack for remembering details that slip through everyone else's fingers. Her gaze flicked once to the calendar, then back to him. "They're ready for you in the boardroom," she said. Her voice carried something heavy, like a note held 1 beat too long. Daniel tapped the capped pen in his fingers against the glass, then set it down. "Any last-minute surprises?" She hesitated. "Just this." She crossed the office and slid a single-sheet printout onto his desk, a list of names highlighted in yellow, and a number at the bottom, 64. Each name had a small handwritten note next to it in Mia's neat script. Single mom, 2 kids, 15 years with company, caring for sick spouse, just bought first house. Daniel's stomach tightened. 64? He murmured. "Initial phase," she said softly. "The CEO thinks it might not stop there." The CEO. Technically, that title belonged to him on paper, chairman and CEO, but in practice, day-to-day power flowed through one man, Victor Kane. Victor was the one the board listened to when nerves got tight, the one Wall Street called first. He was the architect of their recent expansion, the one who had convinced them that automation and global outsourcing were the only way to keep up. Now he was about to present the cost of that strategy, translated into names Daniel recognized from company picnics and Christmas parties. "Mia," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper, "why the notes?" She exhaled slowly. "Because I thought if you saw them as more than employee IDs, maybe." She didn't finish the sentence, just placed a sticky note at the bottom of the page. "Your grandfather once said we don't make machines, we make mortgages possible." He remembered that story. His grandfather, hands still stained with oil, driving across town to personally deliver a paycheck when the mail system had gone on strike. "Because Eddie's got 2 kids and a mortgage, the bank won't accept excuses." "Thank you," Daniel said. He folded the page carefully, as if it were fragile, and slid it into his jacket. The boardroom was an oblong space of polished wood and muted colors, the kind of room where important decisions pretended to be calm. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the town, the rain blurring the lines between the wealthy hilltop neighborhoods and the modest streets closer to the factory. On the far wall, a digital display showed their stock price, a green line gone stubbornly flat, then bending downward over the last 6 months. Victor already stood at the head of the table, tall and impeccably dressed, his silver hair combed like a deliberate statement. Around him, board members shuffled papers, adjusted glasses, checked phones. A tray of untouched fruit sat at the center of the table, the grapes beaded with condensation. "Daniel," Victor said with a businessman's smile, extending his hand. "You look rested. Spent the weekend with your father?" "Pancakes," Daniel replied automatically, shaking his hand. "Like always." Victor laughed lightly. "Tradition. That's what this company is built on." The words scraped against what he knew was printed in bold on the agenda: Operational Restructuring Proposal. They sat. The CFO went first, walking through slides of numbers that blurred together: rising raw material costs, shrinking margins, overseas competition, a looming loan covenant. By minute 12, the words "insolvent within 18 months" appeared on the screen. Victor stepped forward, a remote in his hand. "As you can see," he said, "decisive action is not just prudent, it's necessary for survival. Hartwell isn't a charity. It's a business with obligations to its shareholders, to its debt holders, and yes, to its employees as far as those obligations align." He clicked. A slide appeared. Phase 1, Workforce Optimization. The number 64 stood at the top, blood red against white. Daniel's fingers tightened around the folded list inside his pocket. "We've identified underperforming units and legacy positions that can be automated or outsourced. This will reduce operating expenses by 18% within the first quarter alone. Without this step, we will be forced into far more drastic measures later: bankruptcy, fire sale of assets, perhaps closure of entire divisions." A board member near the end of the table shifted. "Victor, we're talking about people here, not just line items. And those people," Victor replied, "will not have jobs at all if we refuse to face reality now. A smaller cut today saves the patient. Hesitation kills them." A murmur of reluctant agreement moved around the table. Numbers felt safer than maims. Daniel cleared his throat. "What about severance? Retraining support?" Victor nodded, anticipating the question. "Of course, we'll provide the standard package: 2 weeks per year worked, access to a job placement portal, group counseling. We are not monsters." The word hung in the air. Monsters. Downstairs, 64 people were probably tapping at keyboards or tightening bolts, having no idea their lives were being summarized as a cost-saving measure. Daniel thought of his grandfather again. How he used to bring home the metal punch cards from the first machines and lay them on the kitchen table, telling stories about the men who ran them. This one, Eddie, saved up to send his girl to college. This one, Louis, never missed a shift in 20 years. He could taste Sunday's pancakes on his tongue, buttery and warm, his father's voice drifting over the dining room table. "Your granddad never laid anyone off unless the roof was literally collapsing. Said a machine could rest, but a man still had to feed his kids." "Daniel?"
He blinked. Victor was watching him, pale eyes steady. "You have something to add?" Every gaze swung his way. On the far side of the glass, a fork of lightning flashed over the town. He swallowed. 64 people is not a number to me," he said slowly. "It's the Little League coach who took a pay cut during the pandemic. It's the woman who sent me a note when her husband beat cancer and said our health plan made the difference. It's the kid whose father finally made enough money here to afford a down payment on a house." A couple of board members shifted uncomfortably. One man cleared his throat and said, "With respect, sentimental stories won't keep the lights on." Victor's jaw tensed almost imperceptibly. "Daniel, nobody is dismissing the human impact, but we can't preserve every job. That's reality." "Reality," Daniel echoed. He drew the folded list from his pocket and spread it flat on the table. "These are the names on your list, Victor. Next to each name is a note. I'd like each of you to read them before you vote." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mia, who had slipped quietly into the back of the room, stepped forward and began handing out copies she had clearly prepared in advance. As pages changed hands, a subtle shift began. Brows furrowed, sighs escaped. Someone whispered, "She just had a baby," over a line of text. Another muttered, "He's been here longer than I have." Victor's lips pressed into a line. "This is precisely why this kind of detail doesn't belong at this level. We are not equipped to evaluate individual circumstances. We have to think of the health of the whole. Daniel looked around the table at faces that had debated mergers, acquisitions, and dividends with clinical ease. He realized that if he didn't anchor this decision in more than metrics, it would slide into the usual grooves of regrettable but necessary. He drew a breath. What if there's another way? The question dropped like a stone into a still pond. Every head turned toward him. Even the rain seemed to hush against the glass. Victor's expression stayed smooth, but his eyes hardened. If there was a painless alternative, Daniel, it would already be on that screen. Maybe not painless, but different. He glanced at the calendar image that floated through his mind again. Red circles, pancakes, promises. There were numbers he hadn't shared with the board, personal numbers, investments, liquid assets, dividends he hadn't touched, money that felt, in this moment, like an accusation. Give me 72 hours, just 3 days. No pink slips go out, no security escorts anyone out of the building. In those 72 hours, I'll bring you a plan that keeps as many people as possible employed, even if it means I take a hit personally. The room reacted in a low rumble. One board member, Claire, whose father had also been a factory worker, leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Daniel? I'm not sure yet, he admitted, but I'm asking you not to sign away their futures today. Victor placed the remote gently on the table, like someone setting down a scalpel. We don't have 72 hours, he said. The lenders want to see an executed plan by Friday. Any sign of hesitation will trigger their review clauses. The stock will tank, our credit lines will freeze, we'll be negotiating from a position of desperation. All the more reason not to show panic, Daniel countered. If word gets out that we're slashing staff this aggressively, morale plummets, productivity nosedives, and we become the poster child for corporate callousness in a town that has given this company 3 generations of loyalty. He could see some of the board wavering, caught between Victor's cold clarity and the quiet insistence in Daniel's tone. Let's step back, Claire said. A short recess, give Daniel a chance to outline at least a direction. We owe the people downstairs that much. Victor's gaze flicked to her, then back to Daniel, calculating. He knew better than anyone that Daniel's public image, the generous heir who funded scholarships, the man who still showed up at the company picnic in jeans and sneakers, was part of Hartwell's brand. Going visibly against him could have consequences. 30 minutes, Victor said at last. Then we reconvene. If you have an alternative, Daniel, present it, but understand this. Charity cannot replace strategy. Not here. Daniel nodded, though his pulse was thundering. 30 minutes to somehow sketch a lifeline. He stepped out of the boardroom, the polished door swinging shut behind him with a soft click that felt too final. In the hallway, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The scent of coffee drifted from a small break area. On a side table sat a stack of glossy newsletters from last year, the headline in cheerfully bold font, Hartwell, a family company. He lifted one, stared at his own smiling face on the cover, arms slung around a line worker at the company barbecue. The disconnect between the image and the meeting he had just walked out of made something in his chest ache. Daniel? He turned. Mia stood near the elevator, brows drawn together. How bad is it? He looked past her, through a narrow window that offered a slice view of the factory floor below, workers in blue smocks, the rhythmic movement of conveyor belts, the faint blur of a safety poster shaped like a tree with green handprint leaves. Bad enough, he said, unless I figure out how to break my own company's rules without breaking the company. From somewhere below, a bell chimed the end of a break period. Workers began filing back to their stations, unaware that upstairs, their names were already on a list. Print me the last 3 years' operating reports on the Riverband plant, the automation budget, and all executive bonuses. And Mia, pull my personal dividend statements too. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. On it. As she hurried away, Daniel's gaze returned to the little tree poster downstairs, each green handprint a small declaration, we keep each other safe. He wondered when exactly they had stopped believing that applied in both directions. His phone buzzed. A text from his father. Pancakes this Sunday?
Got a new recipe. Dad. His thumb hovered over the screen, then typed back, wouldn't miss it. Might need advice, too. He slipped the phone away. 30 minutes to find a way to honor a promise his grandfather never wrote down, but everyone in Maplebridge believed existed. And upstairs, behind a closed door, Victor was likely already counting votes. The millionaire with the glass office took a breath, then headed not to the finance department, but to the elevator. If he was going to fight for his workers, he needed to see them, to hear them, to remember that a company was more than its balance sheet before he went back to war over theirs. He punched the button for the ground floor, the doors sliding shut on the reflection of a man who suddenly wasn't sure which side of his own company he stood on anymore. And somewhere between the 14th floor and the factory level, Daniel Hart made a decision that would put him on a collision course with the man he had trusted to run his empire.
The elevator doors opened with a muted chime, revealing the hum of the factory floor. Here, the air was warmer, tinged with the faint metallic tang of machine oil and the starch-clean scent of uniforms. Above the assembly lines, safety banners hung in bright colors, a splash of optimism against the gray skeleton of steel beams. The noise hit him first, the steady clack of conveyor belts, snippets of conversation, the low rumble of machines doing the same motions over and over with unhurried precision. Forklifts beeped as they moved crates. Workers in blue smocks adjusted controls, scanned barcodes, wiped sweat from their brows. Up here, on the board floor, they talked about units and throughput. Down here, he saw faces. He walked along the painted yellow path that wound between stations, nodding to workers who glanced up in surprise. Some recognized him and gave a quick wave. Others did double takes, unused to seeing the big boss this far from the glass offices. Past Assembly Line 2, he spotted the old laminated calendar tacked to a column. He remembered approving the design himself years ago. Every month featured a different employee family standing under a maple tree in the park, laughing or holding up picnic baskets. Someone had circled certain days with a red marker: birthdays, anniversaries, team lunch. 3 shifts, 1 small town, and dozens of lives orbiting that calendar like it was a shared heartbeat. "Mr. Hart?" He turned toward the voice. A woman in her late 20s stepped away from a workstation, tugging off her gloves. She had dark hair pulled into a messy bun, safety glasses perched on her head, and a smudge of grease on her cheek she hadn't noticed. Her name badge read, Lena Ruiz, Line Lead. "Didn't expect to see you down here on a Tuesday," she said, half teasing, half wary. "The rumor mill's already working overtime." Daniel's chest tightened. "What rumor?" "That the suits are meeting upstairs and no one's been told why?" She studied him a moment. "People say you can tell what's about to happen by whether the bosses walk through here or just send emails." "And what do they say this walk means?" he asked. Lena shrugged one shoulder. "Depends. You got a clipboard?" He glanced at his empty hands. "No." "Then you might be here to listen instead of count." There was no accusation in her voice, just a tired kind of hope. He nodded toward an unused workstation. "Mind if we talk for a minute, Lena?" She hesitated, then glanced at the clock in the supervisor's office. "It's my turn for a break anyway." She wiped her hands on a rag, hung it on a hook, and led him toward a narrow corridor off the main floor. They stepped into a small break room with vending machines along one wall and a battered round table in the center. On the table sat a plastic container of pancakes, slightly squished, wrapped in foil. "My daughter's idea," she said, following his gaze. "Leftover from yesterday. She insists I bring breakfast happiness wherever I go." A smile tugged at his mouth. "Your daughter likes pancakes?" "She loves them. Every Saturday, rain or shine. I used to work weekends sometimes, and she'd cry if I missed it, so now pancakes are sacred." Something inside him clicked, a thread connecting the stranger's kitchen ritual to his father's, to his grandfather's. Pancakes as protest against chaos. Pancakes as a promise that at least once a week things would be soft and sweet and predictable. "Lena," he said quietly, "how long have you been with Hartwell?" 7 years. Started right after high school. Figured I'd save for community college, then, well, life happened. My mom got sick, bills piled up. College went on the back burner. But this place, it kept the lights on. It put those pancakes on the table." He leaned on the back of a chair. "If you heard, hypothetically, that the company was planning major cuts, what would that mean for you?" She studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Is this one of those surveys they send from employee engagement with the promise it's all confidential?" "No," he said. "This is just me asking." She exhaled slowly. "It would mean selling the house we just barely managed to buy. It would mean moving back in with my brother in his 2-bedroom apartment where my daughter would have to share a couch with his dog. It would mean—" She paused, voice catching. "Calling my mom and telling her we might not be able to pay for the specialist anymore." He felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders, heavier than any number in the board packet. "And for everyone else?" he asked. She tilted her head toward the floor beyond the break room door. "You know that calendar out there?" "Yes," he said. "Every time someone circles a date, they're making a plan based on the idea that their job will still be here. A kid's graduation party, a honeymoon, a surgery they finally scheduled. When cuts come, all those circles start to mean something else." "What?" "Missed payments, late fees, moving trucks." He swallowed. "Do you think people would accept temporary sacrifices to avoid permanent cuts?" Her gaze sharpened. "Sacrifices like what? Reduced hours, short-term pay freezes, voluntary sabbaticals, company-funded retraining if certain lines phase out? I'm thinking out loud." Lena leaned back against the wall, crossing her arms. "People here are not stupid. They read the news. They know things are tough, but what they can't stand is being the last to know, being told everything is fine on Friday and getting escorted out on Monday." He thought of Victor's matter-of-fact tone upstairs. "We are not monsters." If the truth was shared with everyone before decisions were final, and if people could propose ideas to save jobs, even if it meant short-term pain?" She arched her eyebrow. "Like what? A suggestion box?" "More like a war room. A real one, cross-functional with people from the floor, from logistics, from finance, not just executives." Lena laughed once, a soft, incredulous sound. "You know how many times people on the line have said, if they'd just ask us, we could fix half these problems? We know where the waste is, we know which processes make no sense, but no one wants to hear that from the person making $22 an hour." "Then tell me, right now, if you were in that boardroom upstairs with me, what would you say?" She hesitated, then looked at the pancakes on the table as if drawing courage from them. "I'd say," she began, "that Riverbend is running like it's still 1998. He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Machines get taken offline for hours because maintenance schedules are based on guesswork and old habits, not data. We overproduce certain components because forecasting is done from last year's numbers, not real-time orders. We throw away materials that could be repurposed or sold as scrap because the paperwork is annoying. You want savings?" She met his gaze squarely. "Let us build a different system, one that treats the people who use the machines as experts, not just operators." Her words came out in a rush now. Years of frustration finally finding an outlet. "Last month I put together a proposal on how to reorganize Line 3 to reduce changeover time. I did time studies on my own breaks, tracked output, everything. Sent it to my manager. He said it wasn't his lane and to focus on my quota." "Do you still have it?" She nodded. In my locker, printed. The digital one probably died in someone's inbox. Can I see it? She hesitated, again, wary. Why? Because I have 30 minutes to convince a room full of people that the future of this company doesn't live only in spreadsheets. Her eyes searched his face, trying to tell if this was a performance. After a moment, something softened.
Okay, she said, but if anyone asks, I didn't take more than my allotted break time. They walked down a side hall lined with faded safety posters, a hard hat hanging on a hook titled Your Best Friend, a green tree with the words Our Roots Are Strong. Lena's locker was midway down. She spun the dial, opened it, and pulled out a folder bulging with papers. I keep copies, she said with a small shrug. Somewhere my ideas can't get accidentally deleted. He flipped through the pages quickly. Her handwriting was small but precise, with diagrams of machine layouts, arrows showing movement of parts, tables comparing current versus proposed cycle times. You did this on your own time? He asked. On breaks, she said, and yeah, some late nights after my daughter went to bed. What's her name? Amelia, 7. She thinks I build robots all day. He smiled faintly. In a way you do. He scanned a hand-drawn chart. If her calculations were right, her suggestions could reduce changeover downtime by 25% on that line alone. Extrapolated across shifts and products, that meant serious savings. Lena, how would you feel about coming upstairs with me? She nearly dropped the folder. Upstairs where? To the 14th floor, to the boardroom. She laughed in disbelief. You think they want to hear from someone who clocks in with a punch card? They just don't know it yet, he replied. He checked his watch. 18 minutes left. We don't have much time, he added. You'd be speaking to people who don't spend many afternoons in break rooms like this, but they need to understand that cutting heads isn't the only lever we have. Her gaze flitted to the pancakes on the table, then to the old calendar outside. He could almost see her weighing the risk in her mind. Stay in the safe anonymity of the line, or step into a room where she would be the least powerful person, and possibly the most important. My mom always says trouble finds people who keep their heads down just as much as the ones who speak up. At least if I get in trouble for this, Amelia will know I wasn't quiet when it mattered. She closed the folder with a decisive snap. Okay, she said. Let's go save some jobs. They headed back toward the elevator, Daniel slowing his steps by a half pace to match hers. On the wall near the doors, another poster he'd nearly forgotten caught his eye. A large maple tree with paper leaves pinned to the branches. Each leaf held a handwritten note, things employees were grateful for. Steady paycheck, friends on my shift, insurance that covered my son's surgery, pancake breakfasts sponsored by Hartwell. He paused, reading that last one. Who wrote that? Probably Ralph from maintenance. He never misses those breakfasts. Says pancakes taste better when the company pays. There it was again. Pancakes and trees, roots and rituals. The symbols this place had grown around, even as the numbers at the top slowly forgot. The elevator doors slid open. Lena looked inside like it was a portal to another world. Last chance to back out, Daniel said gently. She squared her shoulders. My daughter thinks I'm brave. Guess I should try to live up to it. They stepped in together. As the doors closed, their reflections overlapped on the polished metal. His crisp suit, her scuffed steel-toed boots. A millionaire and a line worker, rising toward a confrontation neither of them fully understood yet. Up on the 14th floor, a digital clock in the boardroom ticked down their break. Victor was rehearsing his closing arguments in his head, confident that logic and fear would carry the day. He did not yet know that the man who owned the company was about to turn against him, not with an emotional outburst, but with something far more dangerous, a different vision of what a company owed the people who built it. And walking beside that man was someone Victor had never considered a threat, a woman who spent her days under humming fluorescent lights, whose greatest luxury was Saturday pancakes with her daughter, and who held in her hands a plan that could rewire everything. Next, the boardroom doors open. Lena faces the executives, and Daniel makes a proposal that puts his own fortune and his relationship with Victor on the line.
By the time the elevator reached the 14th floor, Lena's palms were damp around the folder. She wiped them against her smock, acutely aware of the oil stains, the faint scent of machine coolant that clung to the fabric. Stepping into the polished hallway under soft, recessed lighting, she felt like she'd tracked mud into a cathedral. "Breathe," Daniel murmured beside her. "They're just people." "People who can end my career with a show of hands," she said dryly. That managed to pull a short laugh from him. True, but they're about to learn something they can't unhear. Mia waited near the boardroom door, tablet in hand. Her eyes flicked from Daniel to Lena, taking in the uniform, the boots, the folder. A quick flash of something like approval passed over her face. "You're cutting it close," Mia said quietly. 5 minutes left. "Is Victor in there?" Daniel asked. "He's reassuring the board this will be over quickly. Some of them look relieved. Claire looks like she's ready to throw the water pitcher at him." Daniel nodded. "Good. Maybe I won't be the only one making trouble." He turned to Lena. "When we go in, I'll introduce you. You don't owe them a performance. Just speak like you did downstairs. Clear, honest, specific." Lena swallowed. "What if they ignore me? Then at least they'll have to look you in the eye while they do it." The boardroom door swung open before he could knock. Victor stood there, hand on the knob, eyebrows lifting a fraction when he saw Lena. "Daniel," he said, "we're reconvening. Are you ready to present your alternative, or shall we proceed?" "I am. And this is Lena Ruiz, line lead on Riverbend Line 3. She's here to help." A subtle tightening around Victor's mouth. "Help? How?" "By showing you there are levers we haven't pulled," Daniel said evenly. "You hired me as CEO to challenge assumptions, Victor. That includes yours." For a heartbeat, tension crackled between them, invisible, but palpable. Then Victor stepped aside, gesturing them in with polished courtesy. "By all means," he said. "Let's hear from the front lines." Inside, the board members settled back into their leather chairs, murmurs dying down as they noticed Lena. A few faces displayed polite curiosity, others thinly veiled skepticism. Claire at the far end of the table straightened with interest. Daniel took his seat at the head of the table. Lena hovered a step behind him, clutching the folder like a shield. She opened her folder and pulled out a graph she had hand-drawn, lines in different colored pens. She laid it on the table where everyone could see. "This is our current changeover time between product A and product B on line 3. On average, we lose 45 minutes every time we switch, sometimes more when the maintenance schedule doesn't match reality on the floor." She tapped a second graph. "This is what happens if we rearrange the tool carts, pre-stage certain components, and train one person per shift as a flex tech who can handle simple maintenance without waiting for someone from upstairs to sign off." Her voice grew steadier as she found her rhythm. "Cycle time drops, output goes up. We use the same number of people but get more done and waste less." That's just one line. Imagine if every line lead had the time and mandate to do this. "Interesting," murmured the CFO. "But process optimization doesn't change the fact that demand is down and costs are up. Even with improvements, we still might need to reduce headcount." She met his gaze. "I'm not saying you can magic away every hard choice. I'm saying you're reaching for the axe before you've used the scalpel." That got a sharper look from Victor. Strong metaphor. "But with respect, Ms. Ruiz, you don't have full visibility into our financial obligations." "Maybe not, but I have full visibility into the people who keep this place running. And they've watched executive bonuses go up while their shifts get cut. They watched outside consultants walk through here, take notes, and leave without talking to a single person who uses these machines." She turned to the board as a whole. "You're about to make a decision based on the idea that labor is your biggest variable cost. But you're ignoring the cost of distrust." Claire leaned forward. "Explain that."
"When you treat people like the biggest problem instead of the ones who can help fix it, they stop caring," Lena said simply. "Morale drops, sick days go up, turnover increases, you lose experience, you get more accidents, you pay for all of that, one way or another. Cutting 64 jobs might save you money this quarter, but what does it do to the ones who stay? To the town that keeps buying your products because they believe Hartwell still stands for something? Silence. The kind that meant at least some of her words had landed. Daniel stepped in then, sensing the moment. Lena is one example of untapped expertise, he said. There are dozens more like her on the floor. They have ideas that could reduce waste, streamline operations, and, yes, save money, if we create the structures to listen and act. Victor steepled his fingers. All worthy thoughts, he said, but they don't change the immediate math. Our lenders are not interested in homegrown philosophies. They want concrete steps. Then let's give them concrete steps, Daniel said. I propose the following. He stood, moving to the display screen. Mia handed him a slim folder sheet assembled while he was downstairs, a quick and dirty summary of options. First, a voluntary reduction in executive bonuses and board stipends by 50% for next year. My own compensation goes to zero salary, dividends included, until we're back to target margins. A murmur of surprise broke out. One board member protested, Daniel, that's unnecessary. Symbolic gestures? This is not symbolic, Daniel cut in. It's capital. Money that can cover a meaningful portion of our shortfall in the short term. My personal portfolio is robust. I will not be choosing between a mortgage and medicine. The same cannot be said for the people on that list. He clicked, revealing a rough chart. Second, a company-wide voluntary reduced hours program. Employees can opt to temporarily move to 32-hour weeks with proportionate pay, with health benefits intact, for 6 months. Yes, it hurts, but far less than a pink slip. Combine that with targeted early retirement packages where it makes sense. The CFO frowned. Participation rates for programs like that are historically low. People prefer certainty, even if it means leaving. Maybe, unless they're told the stakes clearly and treated like adults. We've never once given them that choice. He clicked again. Third, a cross-functional efficiency task force. 2 people from each major department, including line leads like Lena. They get protected time to redesign processes. Any savings they achieve that can be measured and verified, reduced waste, improved throughput, feeds into a job preservation fund that offsets further cuts. Now Claire smiled faintly. That's actually compelling. Aligns incentives with our supposed values. Victor shifted in his chair. All of that works, he said, but we are still left with a gap, unless there's a magic pot of money you haven't mentioned yet. Daniel met his gaze evenly. There is one more lever. Asset reallocation. From me. He took a breath. I own the old Hartwell textile building outright, through a separate holding company. It's currently being leased to a third party at a profit. I'm prepared to mortgage that asset and inject the proceeds into Hartwell as a subordinated loan, on terms that give us breathing room. In addition, I'll liquidate part of my personal investment portfolio to establish an emergency fund earmarked specifically for wage support and retraining as we retool. A stunned silence followed. Victor stared at him, momentarily disbelief cracking his composure. You're willing to put your own holdings at that kind of risk? He asked. Yes, Daniel said. My grandfather built this company on the idea that we survive together or we fail together. I'm not going to sit on the hill with a parachute while everyone else waits for the ground to catch them. One board member protested. But Daniel, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. That's the point. He let his gaze travel around the table. For years, we framed every hard decision as an unfortunate inevitability dictated by the market, but markets are shaped by human choices. Ours. We've taken the upside when things went well and socialized the downside onto the people with the least cushion. I'm not interested in that asymmetry anymore. He returned to his seat, but remained standing behind it. So here is my proposal. We suspend the immediate layoff plan. We commit to 90 days of this alternative strategy: executive and board compensation cuts, voluntary reduced hours, early retirement where it makes sense, process optimization teams with real authority, and a capital injection from my personal holdings. At the end of 90 days, if the numbers haven't improved,
We revisit, but we will at least know we tried every avenue before taking away someone's ability to circle a date on that calendar downstairs. A thick silence settled. On the far wall, the stock price flickered, a small, impersonal number that suddenly felt distant. Victor broke it. "And what message does this send to our investors?" he asked. "That we're led by sentiment instead of discipline? That our strategies can be vetoed by guilt?" Daniel held his stare evenly. "It tells them that we are led by someone with skin in the game beyond a contract, that this company's story is more than quarterly forecasts. Investors are increasingly looking at culture and reputation. A public stance like this, owner takes pay cut, funds retraining, invites workers into problem solving, could become a competitive advantage." Claire nodded slowly. "There's data to support that," she said. "Firms that avoid mass layoffs during downturns often see higher productivity and loyalty when things recover. It's not just warm and fuzzy talk." Another board member, who had remained quiet until now, spoke up. "My father lost his job in a mass layoff when I was 10. Corporate memo, cardboard box, goodbye. He never really recovered. If we can avoid doing that to 64 families, we should seriously consider this." Victor looked from face to face, sensing the mood shift. His voice cooled. "Let's be clear," he said. "None of what Daniel suggests is a long-term strategy. It's a delay, a gamble, and it heavily concentrates risk on one individual, him. If we accept, we tacitly endorse blurring the lines between personal and corporate finance in a way that could complicate future governments." "Future governments can be sorted," Claire replied. "People's lives cannot be put on hold." Victor's gaze snapped back to Daniel. "And if the gamble fails, if 90 days from now we are in worse shape, do you walk into that factory and tell them their reprieve was just a stay of execution?" "Yes," Daniel said. "And I'll do it face to face, not in a memo." Behind him, Lena shifted, then spoke up again. "Can I say something?" she asked. Victor's exasperation flickered. "We've heard quite a lot from you, La Remuis Ruiz." But Daniel nodded. "Go ahead." She stepped closer to the table, planting her boots deliberately on the polished floor. "You all talk about risk like it's something that only exists on your screens. But every person downstairs takes risks every day. We risk our backs, our hands, our sleep. We risk being late to pick up our kids if a machine jams and we have to stay. We risk never quite getting ahead because one thing always breaks when you're trying to save. Now for once, the biggest risk is being taken by the person with the most cushion. Maybe that's what leadership is supposed to look like." Her words hung there, simple and stark.
Daniel fell to a strange mix of pride and dread. He was pushing his relationship with Victor, and perhaps the board, to a breaking point. But for the first time in a long while, his actions felt aligned with the stories he'd been raised on. Victor's jaw clenched. He looked for a moment not like the unflappable strategist, but like a man whose control was slipping. "Fine," he said at last. "Let's put it to a vote." They did. One by one, hands rose. Claire's, then two others, then another. The count tipped. When the last hand went up, the result was clear. A slim but decisive majority in favor of Daniel's 90-day plan. Victor's face went perfectly still. "As CEO, you have your mandate, Daniel. I will support the execution of the board's decision." The words sounded correct. The tone did not. Daniel inclined his head. "Thank you," he said. "First action, I want a company-wide meeting in the Riverbend plant this afternoon. I'll explain everything directly to the workforce. No spin, no euphemisms." He looked at Lena. "And I'd like you there with me." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "You spoke for them here. You should be present when they hear what's next." She swallowed hard, but nodded. The board began gathering their papers, conversations breaking out in low tones, concerns, cautious optimism, legal implications. Claire approached Lena with a small smile. "That took guts," she said quietly. "You remind me of someone I used to be before I started wearing these suits." Lena managed a shaky laugh. "Do your suits come with less anxiety?"
Not really. They just hide it better. As the room emptied, Victor lingered. He waited until the others were gone, then closed the door with a soft snick. Alone with Daniel and Lena, his polite mask slipped. "What you did in there," he said to Daniel, "was reckless. What I did was refuse to pretend that cutting people was an act of God. You undermined my authority," he shot back, "in front of the board. You elevated someone from the floor above your own executive team, sending a message that experience and hierarchy mean nothing." Lena stiffened. "I didn't ask to be—" "This isn't about you," Victor snapped, then caught himself. He straightened his tie. "Actually, it is, in a way. You represent a precedent. We cannot run a company based on who happens to be compelling in a meeting." Daniel stepped between them slightly. "What we can't do," he said, "is keep pretending that the people who run the machines should have no say in how we survive. If that threatens your sense of control, maybe that's a control we never should have ceded to one person in the first place." Their eyes locked. Years of professional trust, mentorship, and shared success stood between them like a fragile bridge. "Be careful, Daniel," Victor said softly. "Emotions make poor co-pilots. Today you've chosen to fly with them. When the turbulence hits, don't expect me to say, 'I told you so,' while we both fall." He turned toward the door. "And Ms. Ruiz," he added without looking back, "you are now visible. That comes with opportunities and consequences. I hope you're ready for both." The door closed behind him. For a moment, the room felt strangely hollow. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the town washed in a clear, hard light. Lena blew out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Is it always like this up here?" she asked. Daniel gave a humorless chuckle. "Not always. Usually the stakes are smaller, the language is gentler, and the consequences are easier to hide. Today was different." He looked at her. "Are you okay?" She hesitated. I'm not sure. I keep thinking about that list. 64 names. If this works, they get to keep circling dates on that calendar. If it doesn't—" She didn't finish. He nodded. "If it doesn't, we face them together. No hiding." They stood side by side, two very different lives temporarily braided together by a choice that had shifted the ground under both of them. "Go check on your line," he said gently. "Tell them we'll be calling everyone to the main floor at 3. And maybe don't mention the details just yet. Let me take that weight." She studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether she believed that offer. Then she nodded. "Okay. But for what it's worth, if you're wrong, at least you were wrong trying to do the right thing." When she was gone, the room felt too big. Daniel walked over to the window, looking out at the factory roofs, the neighborhood streets, the small park with its stand of maple trees. He thought of his father's text, of Sunday pancakes and advice he hadn't yet asked for. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Mia. "Town paper heard about the board meeting. They're sniffing around. You'll have more than employees listening at 3. He sighed. Of course. Nothing stayed contained anymore. He typed back, "Then we tell them the truth too." As he slipped the phone into his pocket, he realized that the choice he had made in that boardroom had not just been about numbers or even jobs. He had, in a very real way, turned against his own CEO, the man who had been the company's face to the outside world. In doing so, he had quietly declared a new center of gravity, not in the glass offices, but on the factory floor. Outside, a thin shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, striking the old brick building where his grandfather once walked the floors with oil-stained hands. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like he was walking in those footsteps, not just sitting in the framed shadow of them. In a few hours, he would stand in front of dozens of workers, people like Lena, like Ralph from maintenance, like the names on that list, and ask them to join him in a gamble that required sacrifice from everyone, but most of all from himself. And somewhere, pacing in his own office, Victor was surely already strategizing his next move. Because power, once challenged, never simply yields.
Next, on the factory floor, Daniel lays out the new plan in front of the entire workforce and local press, sparking hope, doubt, and a very public confrontation that will test his resolve and Victor's patience to the breaking point.
By 3 o'clock, the main assembly hall at Riverbend was packed. Workers from every shift crowded the floor, hard hats in hand, eyes tilted toward the makeshift stage near the loading bay doors. Rumor had done its work thoroughly. Even employees on their day off had shown up, some with children in tow, sensing that something bigger than a routine update was about to unfold. At the back, near the open doors, members of the local press clustered with cameras and notepads. The town's small newspaper editor, a woman in a faded denim jacket, stood alongside a regional business reporter and a kid live streaming on his phone for a community channel. Overhead, the fluorescent lights buzzed, casting everything in a slightly too bright glare. The familiar tree poster, "Our Roots Are Strong," had been moved to hang behind the stage, its green paper leaves rustling faintly in the circulating air. Lena stood near the side of the platform, knees slightly shaking. She'd changed out of her smock into a clean blue shirt, but kept her steel-toed boots. Amelia, her daughter, sat on a stack of pallets near the edge of the crowd, swinging her legs and watching with wide eyes. "Why is everyone here, Mama?" she had asked earlier. "Because the man who owns the company wants to talk, and because we all need to hear what he has to say." Now, as Daniel stepped up to the microphone, the low murmur of conversation gradually stilled. He wore no tie, sleeves rolled up, the faint sheen of nerves on his forehead. Mia stood just below the stage with a clipboard, ready to catch details that might need shaping later. Daniel looked out over the sea of faces, tired, curious, anxious, skeptical. He recognized some from holiday parties, from passing hellos in the corridor. Most he only knew as numbers on reports. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice amplified and slightly hollow through the speakers. "I know you've heard that the board met today. I won't insult you by pretending it was about anything other than what you're all wondering, your jobs." A ripple passed through the crowd. Some heads turned toward the press. Others folded arms tighter across the chests. "Here's the truth," Daniel continued. "Our company is under real financial pressure. Costs are rising. Orders are softening. The easy years are behind us, at least for now." He paused. "You deserve to hear that plainly." He took a breath. "This morning, our CEO, Victor Kane, presented a plan to cut costs by eliminating 64 positions. Those cuts would have started here at Riverbend. People in this room would have gone home in the coming days without a job." A collective intake of breath. Someone at the back swore under their breath. Amelia looked up at her mother, eyes wide. "But that plan," Daniel said, "is not happening. Not like that." The tension in the room shifted, surprise slicing through fear. "I fought that plan," he went on. "I argued that we were reaching for the fastest, cruelest tool without exhausting every other option. And for once, the board listened. They agreed to a different path, for now." He glanced at Lena, then back at the crowd. "You know some of you Lena," he said. "She leads Line 3. Today, she stood in a room of executives and board members and spoke clearly about what cuts would mean and about ideas from the floor we haven't been hearing. She helped change the direction of that meeting." All eyes turned to Lena. A flush rose in her cheeks. Daniel gestured for her to step up. She hesitated, then joined him at the microphone. "This is not just my story to tell, it's ours." Lena looked out at the faces. Co-workers, supervisors, the foreman who'd often brushed off her suggestions. She spotted Ralph from maintenance near the front, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. "Hi," she said, voice catching the first time, then steadying. "I guess you've all heard bits and pieces already. Yes, it's true. There was a plan to lay off a lot of us. I saw the list." A murmur. Someone asked, "Was I on it?" in a strained whisper.
"I'm not going to read names," Lena said quickly. "That's not my place. What I will say is this. Instead of letting people decide our fate without ever stepping foot on this floor, I went upstairs. I told them what we could do down here if they'd let us. How we could save money by changing how we work, not just by cutting who works." She exchanged a look with Daniel, drew breath. "And then this guy did something I didn't expect from someone with that fancy office." A faint ripple of laughter simmered. "He put his own money on the line to buy us time," she finished. Daniel stepped forward again. "For the next 90 days, there will be no involuntary layoffs at Riverbend. None. Your jobs are safe during that window." A palpable exhale rolled through the hall. One woman covered her mouth, shoulders shaking in quiet relief. A man wiped at his eyes abruptly and muttered something about dust. "But," Daniel added, and the word cut like a knife through the momentary reprieve, "that doesn't mean everything stays the same." He let the silence stretch just long enough to refocus the room. "In exchange for that guarantee, we all, me included, have to accept sacrifices and changes. Here's what that looks like." He laid it out. Executive bonuses and board stipends slashed by half. His own salary and dividends set to 0. His personal assets pledged to backstop a job preservation fund. A voluntary reduced hours program with health benefits protected. And early retirement packages offered with dignity, not pressure. And the formation of cross-functional teams, including line workers, to identify and implement process improvements. "None of this will work," he said, "if you don't believe in it, or if it's just management issuing directives. We need your ideas, your knowledge, your willingness to try things a different way." A hand shot up near the middle. It was Carlos, a forklift operator known for his sharp tongue. "So we work more creatively for less money, and you call it shared sacrifice? Sounds like a familiar song." A murmur of agreement. Daniel nodded. "That's a fair concern," he said. "Here's the difference, and you have every right to hold me to it. The top takes the first and deepest cut. I'll show you the math. We'll publish, internally, exactly how much is being saved from executive compensation and my own contribution, compared to what we ask from you. No hidden numbers. If, at any point, you feel the burden isn't fairly shared, you call me on it. Publicly, if you have to." The editor of the town paper scribbled furiously. The regional reporter's eyebrows climbed. Another voice piped up, a woman from quality control. "What happens after 90 days? Do we just live on a cliff waiting to fall?" "No," Daniel said. "After 90 days, we review the numbers together, the board, management, and representatives from the floor. If we're on a better trajectory, we adjust and keep going. If things are worse despite our efforts, I won't sugarcoat it. Hard decisions may still come. But you will not be blindsided, and I will not make them from behind a conference room door without facing you." From the back, someone yelled, "What about Kane?" Lena glanced at Daniel. He seemed to anticipate the question. "Victor and I disagree," he said calmly. "He believes immediate cuts are the only responsible choice. I believe that responsibility also includes honoring the community that built this place. The board sided with my plan for now. Victor remains CEO in title, but I will be far more involved day to day than I have been. Consider this a course correction at the top, not a palace coup." It was an artful framing, but those savvy enough could hear the subtext. Lines had been drawn. As if on cue, Victor himself appeared at the edge of the crowd. He'd declined to stand on stage, but clearly couldn't resist being present. His expression was unreadable. Arms crossed, tie perfectly straight. The town reporter spotted him and raised a hand. "Mr. Kane," she called, "do you support this plan?" All eyes swiveled. Daniel hid a wince. This was the public confrontation he'd hoped to avoid, and secretly known was inevitable. Victor's gaze swept the room. He knew how to command an audience. His presence alone seemed to straighten spines. He support any plan that keeps Hartwell alive, and I respect Mr. Hart's willingness to share in the pain. But let me be clear, this is a reprieve, not a rescue. If the numbers do not improve, we are delaying the inevitable and deepening our risk. I want every person here to understand that.
And I respect Mr. Hart's willingness to share in the pain, but let me be clear. This is a reprieve, not a rescue. If the numbers do not improve, we are delaying the inevitable and deepening our risk. I want every person here to understand that. His tone was calm, but under it ran a current of disapproval. A murmur spread, concern, irritation, grudging acknowledgement. Lena stepped toward the microphone before she could second-guess herself. "With respect, Mr. Kane," she said, "what's inevitable is that if you cut 64 people today, this town will never trust Hartwell again. And that has a cost you can't put on a chart." A few people clapped, then more. The sound wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Victor's jaw flexed, but he inclined his head slightly, conceding nothing. "Then let's see," he said. 90 days. I hope, for all our sakes, that my caution proves unnecessary." He stepped back into the crowd, becoming one more dark suit among blue uniforms, then disappeared toward the exit. Victor watched him go, feeling both the weight of the man's doubt and the unexpected solidity of the workers' tentative support. He turned back to the microphone. "We will be forming the first process improvement team starting tomorrow," he said. "Lena will be on it, so will Ralph from maintenance, someone from logistics, someone from quality, and yes, someone from finance. This will not be a talking shop. It will have authority to implement changes, quickly. If you have ideas, feed them through these teams, not just the old suggestion box that may or may not ever get opened." He hesitated, then added, "And one more thing. This Saturday at the community center, my father and I are hosting a pancake breakfast, free, for all of you and your families. Not as charity, but as a way to sit down together outside these walls and talk like neighbors, not job titles." A ripple of surprised amusement moved through the room. "Pancakes?" someone echoed. Lena smiled despite herself. "See? Pancakes make everything a little less scary," she whispered later to Amelia. Her daughter nodded solemnly. "Does that mean you're not losing your job?" "Not for 90 days, Lena said softly, pulling her into a quick hug. "And if I can help it, not after that either." As the meeting broke up, pockets of conversation flared. Some workers were cautiously optimistic. Others remained wary, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. A few cornered Lena, clapping her on the shoulder or squeezing her hand. "You really told them, huh? Didn't know you had that in you," Ralph said. Lena shrugged, cheeks flushing. "I didn't either," she admitted. The town reporter approached Daniel with her notepad. "Can I quote you on mortgaging your own assets?" "Yes," he said. "Just don't turn this into a story about a hero millionaire. If this works, it's because the people on that floor did the hard part." "But you did turn against your own CEO," she pointed out. "That's going to be the headline." He smiled thinly. "Then make sure the sub-headline includes that I did it to save workers, not to save face." She jotted something down. As the hall emptied, Daniel found a moment alone near the tree poster. He touched one of the handwritten leaves, grateful for steady work. The paper was thin, nearly tearing under his fingers. 90 days, he murmured. 90 days to prove this wasn't just a gesture. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was his father, white hair a little wild, hands still bearing faint calluses from his own years on the floor. "Your assistant said you should come. She mentioned you might need advice sooner than Sunday." I felt a rush of uncertainty, pride, and relief all mingling. "Dad, I think I just bet the company and a good chunk of our family's wealth on pancakes and process improvements." His father chuckled softly, then grew serious.
You bet it on people. Your grandfather always said, machines don't stay loyal when times get tough. People do if you've earned it. You're trying to earn it. And if I fail? Daniel asked. Then you failed trying to be the kind of heart your grandfather would recognize. Personally, I'll take that over spreadsheets any day. He clapped his son on the shoulder. Now, he added, about this pancake breakfast, we're going to need a lot more batter. They shared a brief, weary laugh. In that moment, the towering complexity of the situation felt, if not manageable, at least human-sized. Far above them, in his office, Victor stared at a different kind of tree, an organizational chart on his screen dotted with boxes and lines. He zoomed in and out, seeing where the power still flowed, where it had begun to shift. He did not plan to wait passively for 90 days. He had worked too hard, believed too fiercely in his approach to have it overridden by what he saw as sentiment dressed up in strategy. Old loyalties were cracking. New ones were forming. And somewhere in the overlap stood people like Lena and Daniel, caught between competing visions of what leadership meant and what a company owed to those whose lives bent around its calendar. Next, as the 90 days tick down, process improvements bring small victories and surprising setbacks. Tensions rise between Daniel and Victor, and a crisis on the factory floor forces a choice that will define not just the company's future, but the kind of man Daniel chooses to be.
The next weeks blurred into a steady, exhausting rhythm. Mornings began with cross-functional meetings in a repurposed conference room, whiteboards full of process maps, sticky notes with ideas, a big paper calendar pinned to the wall where they crossed off each passing day of the 90. Afternoons were spent on the floor, testing new layouts, timing changeovers, training flex techs so maintenance bottlenecks shrank. Lena found herself living a double life. Half her hours were still on the line, shoulder to shoulder with her team, hands in the work. The other half, she sat across from people in suits, translating floor problems into numbers and charts that would satisfy their need for metrics. Think of it like a different machine, she told herself, on the days imposter syndrome gnawed at her. Same principles: input, process, output, just more talking. The first tangible win came in week 2. By rearranging tool carts and staging materials differently, they cut changeover time on line 3 by 19 minutes on average. Quality held steady, output ticked up. The savings, when extrapolated, weren't world-changing, but they were real. Daniel highlighted the achievement in an all-hands email, attaching a photo of the team in their safety gear, standing next to a whiteboard that read, 19 minutes back. He framed it not as a miracle, but as proof. Listening to the people doing the work paid off. Victor replied with a polite, clipped note, "Good start. Scale will determine true impact." It wasn't wrong, it just wasn't encouraging. In private, Daniel and Victor's meetings grew increasingly tense. They disagreed on priorities, on messaging, on the role of the new cross-functional teams. "These people are not trained strategists," Victor argued one evening, the city lights reflecting off his office glass. "We are exposing them to information they are not equipped to process. Fear will spread faster than solutions." "Fear spreads fastest when people are kept in the dark," Daniel countered, "and they are already more sophisticated than you're giving them credit for." "Emotionally, maybe. Financially, no. They don't understand covenants, market cycles, investor expectations." "Then we educate them," Daniel replied. "Not with jargon, with reality. People can handle hard truths when they know they're being told the whole story." Victor shook his head. "You are trying to turn Hartwell into a civics experiment. This is a corporation, not a town hall." "It's both," Daniel said quietly. "It's always has been. We just forgot the second part when the first got complicated." Beneath their philosophical clash ran something more personal, a sense of betrayal on Victor's side, a sense of disillusionment on Daniel's. They had once trusted each other almost implicitly.
Now, every meeting felt like a debate, every compromise like a temporary ceasefire. Meanwhile, on the floor, the human stakes of their conflict played out in quieter ways. Some employees embraced the changes, offering ideas, staying late to tweak layouts. Others grumbled that they were being asked to do management's job on top of their own. The voluntary reduced hours program saw modest uptake, mostly from those with second incomes or nearing retirement. Daniel had hoped for more, but he understood why many couldn't risk even a small cut in pay. To make it viable, he quietly increased his own capital contribution, pouring more of his portfolio into the job preservation fund. "Your grandfather would either be very proud or think you'd lost your mind," his father remarked over pancakes one Sunday, flipping a batch that steamed in the cool morning air. "Which do you think?" Daniel asked. His father tilted the pan, watching the batter spread. "I think he'd say you finally stopped treating money as the point and remembered it's just one of the tools, like a wrench or a spatula." Amelia, sitting next to Lena at the long table, chimed in. "Or like syrup," she said, drizzling some over her stack. "It's good, but pancakes still taste like pancakes without it, just more dry." Everyone laughed. The simple warmth of the scene briefly washed away boardroom battles and spreadsheets. The community center buzzed with conversations, workers swapping ideas, kids running between tables, retirees reminiscing about the old Hartwell days. On one wall, someone had taped up blank calendar pages. People were invited to write something they hoped to circle 90 days from now, if their jobs held, if the company survived this experiment. "Amelia's 8th birthday," Lena wrote on one. "First vacation in 4 years," another scribbled. "Mortgage payment on time. College fund deposit." Daniel walked along the wall, reading the hopes. They weren't extravagant. They were achingly ordinary. This is what we're really protecting, he thought. Not just jobs, the ability to keep planning small joys. But progress was not linear. In week 7, just as early data suggested their changes were starting to bend the cost curve, a machine on line 2 malfunctioned. A minor issue at first, a misaligned sensor, easily fixable, but the maintenance crew, stretched thin and working off an outdated schedule, missed a critical warning. The machine jammed catastrophically, injuring a worker and forcing a full shutdown of the line for safety reviews. The accident was not life-threatening, but it shook everyone. The injured worker, a quiet man named Thomas with 3 kids, would be out for at least 6 weeks. The shutdown hammered production numbers right when they couldn't least afford it. The union rep, already wary of the rapid changes, pounced. This is what happens when you push people to innovate without giving them proper support. You're trying to squeeze more out of a system that was already at its limit. Victor saw in the accident confirmation of his fears. We are playing at being agile while exposing ourselves to risk we can't absorb. This incident will show up in our insurance premiums, in our safety audits, in our reputation. And if we'd done nothing, Daniel shot back, we'd still be heading toward layoffs. The accident is on us for not fixing maintenance long ago, not on the idea of asking people to help. In the days that followed, tension on the floor was thick enough to taste. Safety posters were updated, refresher trainings were mandatory. But beneath it all lurked a question on many lips. Is this working, or are we just delaying the inevitable and getting hurt in the process?
One night, alone in his office well past dark, Daniel stared 2 sets of numbers on his screen. One graph showed the trend in operational savings from process improvements. Small, but noticeable. The other showed the hit from the Line 2 accident and related downtime. A harsh dip. He rubbed at his eyes. The numbers did not care about symbolism or intent. They sat there, impassive, asking only to be interpreted. He sent a message to Victor. "Meet tomorrow, 7 a.m.? Need to discuss where we are, honestly." The reply came quickly. "Fine." Morning brought gray skies and a cutting wind. They met in a small conference room overlooking the parking lot, where cars glittered with a fine sheen of frost. "The experiment is failing," Victor said without preamble, sliding a report across the table. "Here are the projections. Even assuming no more accidents, we're barely breaking even on the savings versus the capital you've injected. The lenders are asking pointed questions. Investors are restless." Daniel scanned the report. It was dire, but not wholly hopeless. The improvements were there. They just hadn't had enough time to fully offset the shock of the accident. "We still have 3 weeks," he said. 3 weeks to consolidate these gains, to bring Line 2 back online under the new safety protocols, to demonstrate that this was a painful blip, not a pattern." Victor shook his head. "You're looking at this like a man who believes in comebacks. I'm looking at it like someone who has sat through dozens of restructuring cases. The pattern is clear. The earlier you cut, the more room you have to rebuild. The longer you wait, the more likely you are to end up dismantling the whole thing." Silence stretched between them. "This isn't about being right anymore," Victor said quietly. "It's about choosing what kind of failure we can live with, a controlled burn or a wildfire." "And you think a controlled burn means cutting those 64 jobs now?" Daniel said. "Yes," Victor replied, "and probably more. We may need to consider divesting Riverbend entirely. Sell the plant, license the brand, move production abroad. It's the logical path if we're coldly maximizing shareholder value." The word abroad landed like a stone in Daniel's gut. Export the jobs, import the profits. Classic, rational, devastating. He thought of the pancake breakfast, of the calendar on the community center wall, of Amelia asking if pancakes meant her mother's job was safe. He thought of Tomas, lying in a hospital bed, worrying about the same thing. "And what about stakeholder value?" Daniel asked slowly. "The workers, the town, the legacy my grandfather built here." "You can't put that on a balance sheet," Victor said, helplessly. "I can," Daniel said. "Just not in dollars alone." The conversation spiraled from there, around definitions of duty, around case studies of other companies, around their own diverging moral compasses. Neither convinced the other. In the end, they agreed only on one thing. A decision could not be delayed much longer. That night, unable to sleep, Daniel drove out to the old brick textile building his grandfather had bought, the one he'd mortgaged to fund this experiment. It stood at the edge of town, its tall windows dark, the maple trees around it skeletal in the winter air. He parked, stepped out into the cold, and walked slowly around the perimeter, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. In his mind, memories flickered ghost-like over the darkened glass. His grandfather's booming laugh, his father's quiet pride, holiday parties where kids played hide-and-seek among the machines. This building had outlasted recessions, wars, technological revolutions. Was he betraying it by risking its value on a workforce that might not be efficient enough by modern standards? Or honoring it by refusing to let it become just another faceless asset in a stranger's portfolio? He stopped under one of the maple trees. Even stripped of leaves, it still reached for the sky, branches a complex web against the stars, roots unseen, but holding. "Okay, Granddad, if you have any ghostly wisdom to drop, now's the time." The wind answered with a soft rustle through the branches, a sound that could mean anything or nothing. He imagined his grandfather saying something like, "In when in doubt, eat pancakes and listen to the people who actually touch the machines." It sounded like him. So he did the only thing he could with that half-imagined advice. He called Lena. "Sorry, it's late," he said when she answered, groggy. "I needed to ask you something before I make a decision I might not be able to undo." "Give me a second to sit up," she said, rustling. "Is everything okay?" "Not exactly," he admitted. "Tomorrow, the board wants a plan. Victor is pushing hard to go back to layoffs, maybe even consider selling Riverband. Numbers aren't great. We've had wins, but the accident set us back. I need to know, from your side, are these changes making things better or just making people tired?" There was a long pause. "Both," she said at last. "People are tired. They're scared. They're also, for the first time in years, talking like they might have a say in how this place runs. Before, we were just bracing for whatever you decided upstairs. Now we're bracing and also building. It's messy. It's hard. But it feels worth something." "And if I can't convince the board?" he asked. "If, despite everything, they decide to cut, will you think this was all just false hope?" There was a long pause. "Hope that ends hurts, but so does never having any. At least this time, if it ends, we'll know we fought with you, not just against a faceless system. That matters." Her voice softened. "Whatever you decide tomorrow, just don't disappear. Don't hear it in an email or from a stranger in HR. Be there. Look people in the eye. That's the only thing that will make any of this feel real, either way." After they hung up, Daniel stood under the bare maple tree a little longer, breath clouding in the air. The dark night choice had finally arrived.
Not a choice between good and bad, but between two kinds of loss. He could side with Victor, implement cuts now, preserve more capital, maybe satisfy the markets. He would save some version of Hartwell, but it would be a company his grandfather might not recognize. Or he could double down on the risky path, reject layoffs again, shore up the experiment with even more of his own resources, knowing full well they might still lose. He might be accused of irresponsibility. He might lose far more than money. In the end, what tipped the scale wasn't a spreadsheet or a speech. It was a small, stubborn image, a calendar covered in circles, some written in careful pen, some in clumsy crayon. The idea that he, with all his wealth, was being asked to decide which of those circles would never happen. He thought of Lena's daughter, of Tomas's kids, of his own father still getting up early to flip pancakes because rituals mattered more than stock prices. "Okay," he said softly to the empty night. "Then we go all in." The next day, the board assembled in the same room where this had all begun. The atmosphere was tenser now, the stakes clearer. Even the fruit tray looked nervously arranged. Victor spoke first, summarizing the numbers, highlighting the risks, pressing his case. He did it calmly, competently, without malice. He believed what he was saying. Then it was Daniel's turn. He didn't open with charts. He opened with stories, the process improvements, the near-miss failures, the accident and what it had taught them about neglected maintenance. He painted a picture of a company in the messy middle of trying to reinvent itself without leaving its people behind. Then he laid down his final card. "I am prepared," he said, "to convert my existing subordinated loan to Hartwell into equity and to inject additional capital by fully mortgaging the old textile building and liquidating further portions of my portfolio. This will not be a loan with an interest rate. It will be a true bet on this company's future, tied to performance, not guaranteed. In exchange, we commit as a board to a clear condition: no involuntary layoffs at Riverbend for at least a year, barring absolute catastrophe. We focus on process, on innovation, on values. If, after that, we are still bleeding, I will not fight necessary surgery, but I will not cut while the patient is still responding to treatment. Some board members looked alarmed. Some looked impressed. Claire looked like she wanted to applaud and cry at the same time. Victor spoke quietly. "This is unprecedented," he said. "You are effectively socializing the downside onto yourself while privatizing the upside for the collective. Investors will question your rationality." "Let them," Daniel replied. "I'd rather be questioned for protecting people than praised for abandoning them." They debated. They questioned. Lawyers muttered about fiduciary duties and precedents. Through it all, Daniel remained steady, not defiant, but resolute. In the end, perhaps because of the public nature of his commitments, perhaps because the alternative felt like too swift a betrayal of everything Hartwell claimed to be, the board approved his proposal, again by a slim but clear majority. Then came the harder part. Victor stood. He adjusted his cufflinks, gaze traveling around the table. "In light of the direction this company has chosen, it is clear that my philosophy no longer aligns with the board's. I believe in disciplined restructuring and ruthless prioritization of shareholder value. You have chosen a path where stakeholder considerations are given equal or greater weight. That is your right, but it is not a journey I can, in good conscience, lead." He turned to Daniel. "So, I am tendering my resignation as CEO, effective immediately. I will remain available as a consultant through any transition you deem necessary, but Hartwell needs a leader whose heart and head are fully behind this new experiment. That is not me." A ripple of shock. Even Daniel, who had sensed some kind of break coming, was stunned by the finality of it. "Victor," he began, "you don't have to." "I do," he said, a rare softness in his voice. "If I stay, I will fight you at every turn. Not because I want you to fail, but because I cannot shake what I believe about risk. That would tear this company apart."